Welcome back, guys. Okay, we're 6 episodes deep. Didn't think I was going to get this far, but hey, I'm glad you guys came back and joined me again. Let's go ahead and dive into this one. It might be a bit of a longer video, but let's see where this goes. So, in previous videos, we touched a little bit on networking. That's pretty much been the focus of everything up until now. The reason I did that first was because do you need networking knowledge to work in IT, in particular, the IT service management sector of IT? So, the short answer, in my opinion, yes. Whatever side of tech or IT that you're on, you're going to need to understand networking, even the fundamentals of it to some degree. Some different specialties and things you may need to know it more than others. Like if you're a network engineer, well, your network knowledge is going to have to be definitely expert level, I would assume, right? So I'm pretty sure like if you're going to be a network engineer or a network architect, your network knowledge is going to have to be up to par. Versus in my line of work, I already understand basic networking principles, but I don't know everything by a long shot, right? And it's not really necessary for me to do my job. So, what are some of the things that I need to know for my job to be successful that fall under the networking umbrella, even though I'm more on the business side of IT right now? So, again, just a quick summary from, I believe it was my last video. If you haven't seen that, go ahead and watch that up here. But just a quick recap. IT service management, again, can be considered the business side of IT because while you're definitely dealing with IT concepts, hence the networking and all that stuff, you don't necessarily deal with purely like IT things all the time. Your whole thing is focusing on the assets or services that you provide to your customers and making sure that everything is working properly. If something's not working properly, then in my case, I serve as an interface between multiple different parties to basically get the problem solved within a reasonable amount of time, also known as service level agreements, which, just a quick definition on that, a service level agreement is basically a document, a legally binding document that a vendor or someone that provides a service to somebody or to another organization signs to ensure that whatever service that they are giving to you is up and running a certain amount of the time. Quick example. If you have a Wi-Fi provider for your company, and let's say your company has a physical location, it's a brick and mortar. You have an office tower or office building, where the case is office suite, and you use one of the major internet providers, Verizon, AT&T, whatever the case is, T-Mobile, they provide Wi-Fi now. You can have them sign a service level agreement and say, hey, our Wi-Fi needs to be up and running 98, 99% of the time. If it falls below that, there'll be a penalty. There might be a financial penalty where normally you would pay a bill to them, but they have to reduce that bill or give you a credit at the end of every month, right? Just a quick example. Also, service level agreements, of course, are based on service levels. Now, it wasn't until I got into this contract when I learned what an actual service level is. I knew what service level agreement was, but even in school with business degrees and stuff like that, I never knew what a service level was. A service level is basically that whole thing of you have like a platinum package, a gold package, a silver package, a bronze package, that whole thing, those are different service levels. These are the different products, services, or different tiers in which if something goes wrong with a product that we are giving to you and something goes wrong and you let us know, it serves as a matter of prioritization. It's not only, well, depending on what the service or product is that you're giving to your customers, it's not only you get less with the lower package versus when you get like say a platinum package, you get more things. That's part of it. The other part of it is, in this case, if we're talking about uptime, how often does a service need to be up and running and readily available for us to use? That is a matter of prioritization. It gives the vendor or service provider a good idea of who to prioritize over other companies or other clients, because one company or one client may say this needs to be up and running 99% of the time. When something goes wrong, you need to respond or resolve the situation within 24 to 48 hours. Versus another client may say it doesn't need to be resolved within 24 to 48 hours, but you guys need to give us some type of update response or at least dispatch like a technician, someone to at least take a look at it within 24 to 48 hours. So when you have something like that, the person or the client that says this needs to be resolved within a day or two, they're going to have higher priority because especially if they have a financial penalty, they're definitely going to be placed over client B that says you guys don't need to solve this within two days, 1 2 days. but you do need to get someone sent out here to take a look at what's going on with this thing that we bought from you. Otherwise, there may be a penalty for that as well. So that was a little bit of a side rant there, but I did want to leave you guys with that because that's actually a very big component of my job. And I think it's safe to say if you're in service management in general, SLAs are going to be a pretty regular and consistent part of your day, right? So let's get back on track when it comes to the networking knowledge and some of the things I deal with. Now, first things first, and this is just my personal opinion, but again, I've seen on many forums, I've spoken to people that are already in the IT industry before I got into it, and everyone pretty much says the same thing. Your networking understanding needs to be anywhere from decent if you're going to something a little less technical to very high up if you're definitely focusing on like network engineering or something like that, especially if you're trying to get into the cloud. So I personally believe you do need to have your network understanding up to par because even if you're not coding and you know architecting networks and things like that, or you're not taking care of the hardware of the networks like servers and routers, hubs, switches, things like that, you're still in IT. You're still doing work that revolves around a centralized or like a cornerstone of certain piece of information that we all pretty much need to be able to talk to and speak to pretty much on a regular basis. Your work is going to revolve around these fundamental ID principles. So it's best to get this stuff out the way. That's why in previous videos, I covered just what is networking as a concept, what therefore is a network, IP addresses, MAC addresses, and I try to illustrate those things using stuff like Naruto, and I even drag Bleach into it a little bit to, you know, just paint that picture. Because when you're studying for, let's say, the CompTIA trifecta, especially the Security Plus, you definitely need to understand networking for that. I have a couple AWS certifications. I actually managed to get those before I got my Security Plus. But let me tell you, because I didn't understand networking to even like a decent degree, it took me multiple times to get an AWS associate certification and multiple times to get the Security Plus certification. That both of those pretty much just rely heavily on networking concepts that they don't just they don't blatantly like teach you. They assume that you know that information already. So they just kind of move forward with it, and it's up to you to put the pieces together. Another reason you may want to have certain networking principles down is because tech is moving so fast that you may encounter something out of the blue and it would just help. It may not cost you a job if you don't know what to do when something goes down, like if something's not connecting right, if there's a bad gateway, so you're not able to do your job or at least part of your job. And plus, if you're not on the IT team, that's not even something for you to handle. You may not be on the IT team, the analytics team, DevOps team, whatever you're doing with your respective organization. You may not be on those specific teams, but it's nice to be able to spot when certain things are going wrong, because then one, it may help you stand out amongst the crowd if you're trying to make a lateral move or get a direct promotion to another role that may be more technically inclined. Or it's just nice to know stuff because if you're like me and you're a nerd, it's nice to know things for the sake of knowing things. Cybersecurity in particular, while of course there are people that work specifically in cybersecurity, it's kind of that thing where it's everyone's responsibility, right? So, for example, my company fairly regularly does phishing like simulations. Like they'll send you an email, and I'm sure other companies do this too, where they send you a phishing email, and it's up to you to determine whether or not this is a phishing, like a scam that's you're being tested on, if it's a real thing, or if it's just like a regular everyday email address that or email that might just look a little weird, right? If you click on a link that's in that phishing email that's sent by your internal security team and you fall for it, there, depending on your company, there may be some type of score. They may have you do additional training. Hopefully that doesn't lead to like termination or anything like that. I haven't heard of that. I have not failed to a point of that happening. But all that to say, there are small little networking details that help you avoid falling into those pitfalls. For example, something that a lot of people don't know is when you have a link, like it says click here to access the report, or click here to get to the website, and you click that link and it takes you to another website or it opens up a document. What you can do, instead of clicking it right away, you can do one of two things. I actually just did this today with a phishing simulation that was sent to me. One, you can just hover over the link, don't click it, and at the bottom, at least with Windows, I think Mac does this as well, but with Windows, the URL that shows up at the bottom of the screen, you can take a look at it. You can see that, okay, if this is supposed to be coming from our internal security team, IT team, whatever the case is, then the website link, like the URL, should be reflective of that. It should say, whatever your company name is.com with some other stuff into it. But if it's like 22.0v, that doesn't look right. That doesn't look legitimate. If this was going to an actual like internal website that your company uses, is proprietary or belongs to your employer or the company you're contracted to, then the website link would have the company name in there somewhere, at least from my experience so far. So when it doesn't have that and it has a bunch of numbers and letters that don't really make a lot of sense, chances are it's a phishing email and you're either getting tested and you're about to fail if you click on that link, or it's a real phishing email and you click on it and you just compromise not only yourself, you may potentially have just compromised the entire organization or at least a division of it, right? Another thing you can do, and this is what I did today to kind of piggyback off of that, instead of clicking the link in terms of like opening it, I right clicked it, copied the link, and then I pasted it into my notepad on my work laptop. From there, I was able to scroll back because the link was so long. So I was able to scroll back in the notepad and check again the domain name to see if the company's name was in it or anything like that. And it wasn't there. Again, it was just like numbers and letters that didn't make any type of sense. It doesn't resemble anything like a regular website I know. So when I saw that, I was like, yeah, this is a phishing alert. I'm going to report this as a phishing alert. I'm pretty sure this is a simulated phishing email from my internal security team. And that's exactly what it was. And I passed, which is good. But those are the type of things that you want to look at. But believe it or not, even little nitty gritty things like that, that's considered networking knowledge. Another reason you want to know networking to a good degree, again, especially if you're trying to focus on non-technical stuff, non-programming, not networking heavy and things like that. We already covered this with the last video where we talked about duplicate IPs for a bit. Again, if you are trying to have a package delivered to your house, your apartment, whatever the case is, but let's say for sake of argument, your house, and the USPS, UPS, whatever person, the person delivering the package is getting ready to walk up to your house and they're like, okay, so we're looking at 1001 Almighty Drive, right? And then they're like, well, hold on. This building over here has the same building number, looks the same. Wait, there's another building right here with the same number and looks the same. Which one do I go to? I don't know which building I'm actually supposed to take this package to, right? Who's supposed to receive this and make sure I don't give this to the wrong person? Because depending on what it is, it could be just a regular mishap to I just gave away something probably confidential or personal to people that don't need to see this, right? So it can be pretty bad there. Ultimately, what's going to happen is that the message or the package is not going to be able to be delivered at all because at some point it's going to reach a point like I don't know where to go. That's how IP addresses work. When you have IP addresses that are duplicates of each other, basically when multiple devices are linked to the same IP address, the system's not going to know where to direct this information, so it's just going to stop until you correct it. One last detail I want to leave you guys with, and this is something else that I've learned on my job as well. In the last video, I mentioned MAC addresses, IP addresses. We opened that can of worms a bit and talked about it. And I mentioned how MAC addresses usually do not change. IP addresses are more likely to change, especially in our regular everyday lives, because you may connect to your personal Wi-Fi, a friend's Wi-Fi, some relative's Wi-Fi, Wi-Fi at your corporate job, wherever the case is, and the IP address will be different. But more times than not, people are like, as long as I'm connected to the internet, I don't really care, right? Now, here's the thing. MAC addresses can change. The thing with MAC addresses is that they are attached to a physical component within your laptop. They're not meant to change like that. In order for your MAC address to change, from my experience so far, it's not something you can go into like a computer and change it on the screen and say, hey, set my MAC address to this, this, and that, and make it stay the same basically. That's something you do with IP addresses. MAC addresses, to my understanding, you don't do that. MAC addresses, if you want to change the MAC address, you have to take that, in my line of work with the products that we sell, you have to take out the controller board, which is how a device gets its MAC address as well as its IP address. You take out one controller board and you put another one in. When you do that, the MAC address changes. Here's a key detail. An IP address can change while a MAC address can stay the same. But if you change the MAC address, the IP address is bound to change as well. Now you can still reset an IP address to static and then change it to whatever IP address you want it to. But at least initially, when you take out a controller board or controller card or a NIC network interface card, which allows your different phones and devices and things to connect to the internet, when you take one out and you put another one in, the MAC address is going to change, which is going to change the IP address by default, right? So here's a simple way to think about it. I think of it as kind of similar to the Naruto example I tried to use earlier when it came to how he was trying to develop his Rasen Shuriken technique. It's similar to that. Think of it like this. Think of the MAC address like your regular name and the IP address like your nickname. When your nickname changes, or rather when people don't call you your nickname, you're still you if someone calls you by your regular name. That part doesn't really change. But if someone's like, hey, I'm not talking to Christina, or I'm not talking to Dave, or I'm not talking to Brian, I'm talking to Sean. Well, you don't want to call Sean Christina's nickname or Richard's nickname or anyone else's nickname. This is a whole different person. You know what I mean? This is a whole different, entity in itself. So hopefully that makes sense. I hope that was a decent example to get that through. Or again, if I butchered that, hopefully just to wrap it up, the MAC address is like the physical address of a home. It doesn't really change like that. Versus an IP address, it usually changes a lot unless you just set it not to. But yeah, guys, I appreciate your time. Hopefully this video was helpful for you. If you have any comments or feedback, go ahead and throw that down in the comment section. I'll see you guys next time. Later.